Hey, I just want to talk about this concept that I haven't thought of this specifically, this dopamine cycling thing. This is a pretty common thing you find online. As you see this on a lot of study channels, but I believe I am the first one to incorporate the usage. I don't do this myself with the drug Semax, and how I believe that could benefit a lot of people. So here's essentially dopamine cycling, right? So most people's dopamine, it's not the only neurotransmitter at play here in the pleasure parts of the brain, is like spiked and lowered throughout the day. So this is meant to show your baseline. Your baseline is kind of going to be your where your dopamine would be at if you just were sitting there just like outside or something, not really doing anything, or what it's supposed to be at when you're not receiving any excess pleasure or pain exogenously. So here would be a lot of pleasure, here would be a lot of like boredom or pain. And so I'll talk about this green line later, but here we see scrolling. Obviously, you wake up in the morning, you scroll on your phone, and you're going to have this huge amount of dopamine and like norepinephrine, all these neurochemicals being released in your brain. You're going to feel pleasure from that. And because of that, you only have so much dopamine in your brain you can use in a day. So it's going to go way down after that. You're going to be significantly below baseline because you went this high amount. It's realistically, this is kind of a weird model. It's going to be like down here more, honestly. It's going to be lower than you went up. And so here we have a really quick spike, which is a lot worse, which is like pornography, recreational drugs, scrolling. I don't say anything wrong with YouTube, using YouTube. I use it all the time. Some great content on there. You probably shouldn't be scrolling on TikTok, but I would never do these two things. I would say these are two things you should not be doing. To have optimal dopamine, you're going to spike your dopamine a ridiculous amount for a very short period of time. And then studying, working, other boring tasks are these lows, and you are just not going to want to do them. Dopamine is incredibly important in your motivation, and you're just not going to want to do these all. It's going to be a miserable experience overall. So why does this matter? In short, you only have so much dopamine in your storage, quote unquote, each day. Drugs like Semax, which I'll talk about later, can essentially tell your brain to produce more of these motivation and pleasure hormones. If you have a higher dopamine baseline, you're essentially, I don't know why this is here, you're essentially going to do better on all tests, no matter what. So I'll talk about Semax later. This is what optimally it should be like. This isn't obviously the whole day. This is just like a section. Say you wake up, you go above baseline because you're waking up, you're walking around, getting water, whatever. Sunlight, music, healthy food. These are all great sources of dopamine that honestly aren't going to give you as much pleasure as like eating like fucking Pop-Tarts or scrolling on your phone, but they're going to, over time, they're going to keep your dopamine higher than on average you would have it here. So if you were to take, for example, 1 hour, and this is the hour here, so like roughly this is 1 hour, your dopamine in this hour is going to be higher above baseline because you're just not going to get that huge spike. And so whatever, you do this enjoyable stuff and then it goes down still above baseline, but you have to do like homework, studying, work, boring stuff. Obviously, you're still not going to want to do that unless you really enjoy it, but it's going to be much easier to get to doing these. You're not going to have to use as much discipline, and you're much more likely to not like cut short on it. So anyway, dopamine is not the problem, right? It's the amount we're getting from this. Dopamine is a great neurotransmitter. So is serotonin, norepinephrine, all the other ones that are involved with pleasure. It's this ridiculous amount of dopamine we see from this, and this also, but we see from these two things. And also, junk food is kind of in between these. But it'll crash your dopamine way more than even this will. except recreational drugs, but this is what I mean. I probably shouldn't say that on YouTube. And now we're going to talk about this, which I've been mentioning, Semax. This is what it looks like. It's dosed nasally. You inject this into a nasal spray bottle with water, of course. It's typically dosed 2 to 3 times a day, and for the version most people use, each spray is usually around 300 micrograms. Effective dose depends, but it seems to be, from my research, 600 to 1,000 micrograms of regular, this is important, regular Semax. So I mentioned regular, right? There are a lot of different types of this drug. Now we see NASA, which is N-acetyl Semax amylate, the most effective, longest lasting. This is what's good for it. If you want the most effective, longest lasting, single dose, most stable, and cheapest, this is the one I would highly recommend. NAS is N-acetyl Semax. It's this, but it doesn't have the amidate, which amps up the power and essentially makes it more stable. Also, on the shelf, it lasts a lot longer because you see, this drug will typically degrade after 30 days to 2 months, so 1 to 2 months. But this drug and this drug, really just this one, will degrade after roughly 3 months. Semax is just regular Semax. Now, I've talked about this, but what does it do? It's a 7 amino acid Russian-developed peptide and is effective for increased focus and mental clarity. Mainly works with brain-derived neurotropic factor. This is involved in making new, and a thing called NGF, but that's not as important. This is involved in learning, focus, pleasure, motivation, a lot of things. It's going to boost it in a very good way. It has some dopamine effects, but not huge. It will overall increase your dopamine. So here we see essentially this neurotransmitter, which is a good neurotransmitter. You want to have a good amount of this on a placebo versus Semax. And we see they have a level of like 160, and these people have a standard level of 100. That's just an interesting study. And it helps with ADHD, low focus, bad energy, or low energy, bad focus. But this really all depends on your dose and the type of Semax that you're using. I would personally recommend NASA. Obviously, I don't use Semax, but this is N-acetyl Semax amidate. It has better effects, is what I would say. It's just better. And if you look at the website Limitless Biotech, it's the same price as the regular, which is where I would recommend sourcing from. It's the same price as regular Semax. And there's basically 0 proven negative effects to this drug, save headaches. It will give you very bad headaches from reports that I read. Anyway, this is very important how you have to cycle it correctly. You'll have bad side effects if you don't. Let's talk about that. Cycling and dosing. From my research, all Semax should be cycled one of 2 ways. 5 days on, 2 days off. This is just like weekday, weekends, weekday, weekends. This is probably better. Or this, which will be also effective. And these off 6 weeks, this is 6 weeks on, 6 weeks off. These off 6 weeks, usually people do it on another drug called Selank, which is another kind of similar drug to this. Now, all Semax should be dosed differently. These seem to be the most effective dose of each. Regular Semax twice daily. I would say this is probably the best protocol for using it. This is usually 2 sprays, so usually about 300 micrograms in 1 spray. And acetyl Semax, 600 micrograms when you wake up. And then optionally, you could do 1 to 2 p.m., another 300 micrograms. I would say NASA is probably what you want to be doing, as I've said. 300 to 600 micrograms. Probably, it depends on your body size. If you're like a smaller woman or something, I would definitely stick with the 300. If you're a larger man or you have worse effects, I'd go further to 600. The moment you wake up, I would stick to this, but this 600 seems to be pushing it. For some people, I've done more research on this now, but 3 to 600, you're pretty much fine. once daily max. You should not go over that. So how are these things even related? How do they mix? The effects of the peptide seem to provide stable, higher levels of dopamine and other reward chemicals throughout the day, which will make you better at mostly everything, like I said, except like sleeping. This drug will not have any bad effects on your sleep. You shouldn't take it right before you go to bed. I just don't see why you would, because it's a waste, but its half-life is maybe 12 hours, and even then, you could take it right before you go to bed and you could fall asleep just as fast. These should be done with caution and thoughtfulness. I would source from limitlessbiotech.com. Please be careful. So this drug itself is not FDA approved. You should really be careful, and you should not inject this drug. I have not done any research on injection. You should only dose nasally, from what I know, unless you do your own research. But this seems to be perfectly safe and a very beneficial medication, from what I've researched. Obviously, don't take this serious medical advice. Do your own research, please. Anyway, so here with our enhanced baseline while on the medication Semax, we notice higher dopamine baseline significantly and BDNF baseline. The BDNF is kind of cycled throughout the day, but you'll have a higher baseline, or you'll have a higher average amount of BDNF. BDNF more looks like this throughout the day, and this is a good thing. You want it to look pretty much. You pretty much want your BDNF to look like that, and then, oh God, because oh my Lord, this is hilarious. You're gonna get like a significant amount of it from. So I would say like activities like running are going to give you a high amount of BDNF. But I would not recommend running for general. And it's going to go up and down throughout the day, and usually 90-minute cycles. But anyway, I would not recommend other things for BDNF, or at least like common things. Like there are other drugs like dihexa that seem to be good. But things like running, you notice the baseline is typically right here. But your dopamine baseline after you run is usually, it's around the regular baseline, but it's usually like right here. And also the levels of cortisol are going to be really raised during that time, and that's going to be negative for just having good focus later in the day. So this seems the best way to enhance focus by cycling your dopamine and pairing it with Semax. This is what I would recommend if you're in college and you really need to lock in for finals. If you need to screenshot this is a very important thing. This is definitely something I would recommend to people who have problems with focus or ADHD.